My name's Rowena Zimmerman. I'm the Director of Communications and Outreach for Blue Ridge PRISM, and we're so happy that you are here with us today. We're thrilled to have David Coyle here from Clemson University, and he's going to talk all about Callery Pear. Okay, so we have some wonderful events coming up on Earth Day that Blue Ridge PRISM will be tabling at and doing demonstrations at. And so we hope that you can join us at some of these events. We've got one in Charlottesville at Monticello's Tufton Farm, which is the Center for Historic Plants. We have one in Ruckersville at Greene County Visitor Center that's also in tandem with the Virginia Native Plant Society and the Greene County Visitor Center, as long as other events, as other organizations. And then we have a fun one at Gypsy Hill Park in Stanton, which is the Earth Day Stanton celebration. So if you want to get out and about on Earth Day, and please come say hi to us. We just want to make sure you know that Blue Ridge PRISM is supported by the Virginia Environmental Endowment and donors like you. And if you would like to make a donation today, please visit us at www.blueridgeprism.org/donate. Now I'd like to go ahead and introduce Rod Walker, who's the founder and president of Blue Ridge PRISM. He will do a quick introduction for our spring meeting and let us all know what PRISM has been up to lately. Rod, I'm going to stop sharing, and then you can share your screen.
Will do. Okay. Okay, here we go. There we go. Okay. Thank you, Rowena. And welcome everybody. Delighted to see everybody here. My section here is going to be really short, so we can get on to the main event. I'm going to talk just briefly for those who are not familiar with the Blue Ridge PRISM. What is the PRISM? And then I'm going to give just a couple of quick major activity updates before turning it back over to Rowena. So in terms of the Blue Ridge PRISM, PRISM stands for Partnership for Regional Invasive Species Management. We are generically what's known as a cooperative weed management area. We're the only active one in Virginia, but there are hundreds of them in the US. So in effect, we're a collaboration of federal agencies, state and local agencies, conservation organizations, contractors, private landowners, and various others. We are a nonprofit, and we are, as Rowena noted, funded by your donations. So thank you all very much. And our mission is to reduce the impact of invasive species in our targeted geography. And to that point, if I can move my slides, hang on. To that point, our targeted geography includes 12 counties that you can see in the map here, from Augusta and Nelson to the south, up along the Blue Ridge to Loudoun and Clark at the north. This encompasses a little over 3.5 million acres, including the entire Shenandoah National Park. We estimate there's roughly 50,000 landowners who have 5 acres or more in this territory, but we service everybody, but that just gives you kind of a scope of our audience, if you will. The people who are involved in the PRISM, we have an advisory council, and it's just a delightful and wonderful group of people who are supporting us here. So the advisory council is listed here on the left. And they're active with us in one way or another, and we've got other partners that we work with on a fairly regular basis, listed here on the right. It's as I say, it's just a phenomenal and fabulous list of great partners. So our two primary activities, the way I describe this is we have a focus on our home geography, where we work with our landowners throughout the 12 counties. And this is to educate, inspire, provide information, and facilitate their actions in removing and replacing invasive plants on their properties. Beyond that, we also have, in the last several years, undertaken, if you will, actions that are statewide to try and address the invasive plant problem across the entire state. So for our landowners, here's some of the kinds of things that we do. We have quarterly meetings. This is one of them. These are done by video conference. We've been doing more and more tabling at events after the pandemic. We did none during the pandemic, but these have definitely been picking up. You can see some of them being listed here for Earth Day. Speaking engagements, if you have an interest in having one of us come speak to your group, we're available to do that. We have workshops we give on a regular basis, and you can see when those are scheduled on our website. So these include how to identify the common invasive plants, as well as how to treat them. So we also publish newsletters on a quarterly basis. There's lots of information you can download from our website on specific plants and lists of contractors, etc. If you have questions, you can send your questions, including photos of plants, to info@blueridgeprism.org. We have 2 full-time people whose primary job is to visit with landowners on their properties and provide advice. So if that is something that is of interest, feel free to, again, inquire through info@blueridgeprism.org. Last year, we had over 2,000 attendees at our events. And we currently have somewhere well over 4,400 people on our email list. So and I hope to break 5,000 by the end of the year. So it's business is booming, if you will. On a statewide basis, we're involved in quite a variety of different things. We do lots of different things with the Department of Forestry, whether it's grant programs, participating in some of their other programs, such as the Hardwood Initiative or the Forest Legacy Program, or creating materials that we can both use. With the VDOT, we kicked off a study 2 years ago. The final report is actually sitting on my desk waiting for me to read, where they are recommending what native plants VDOT should be using when they do construction and maintenance activities. With the Virginia Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, we're involved with the Virginia Noxious Weeds List, as well as some other activities. There are 12 more plants that are currently wending their way through the approval process. They're listed here. We have a project going on with the University of Virginia to prove that we can use a drone to fly over a piece of property and map specific species, and so that managers and others can see what is growing and where, so they can go get it. And with the Department of Conservation and Recreation, we again have multiple activities going on there, including our work on getting more plants onto the noxious weeds list. Some other statewide things we're involved in. We're on the advisory council for the Virginia Forestry Association. We're on boards of several other environmentally focused nonprofits. We're constantly working on ways to reduce the retail sale of the plants there's the 90 plants on the invasive plant list published by the Department of Conservation and Recreation. So we're trying to get those out of the retail sales. About 30 of those 90 plants are being sold in Virginia. We're trying to get people to remove Ailanthus before the spotted lanternfly arrives. And if any of you are out there looking to form a new PRISM, we would be delighted to help you. So here's a couple of major updates. One I'm not going to talk about beyond this slide is that in a meeting I was in yesterday, the Department of Forestry told those of us attending that we are now free to publish information about some new financial assistance programs available to landowners from or through the Department of Forestry. So if you're on our email list, keep a lookout. We'll be sending some information out as soon as we can get the materials prepared and ready to go. But in other news, I'm going to talk about some legislative successes and a statewide workshop that's coming up. From the legislative standpoint, there's 2 bills that were just recently signed by the governor. They're both effective on the 1st of July. The first one directs the 2 secretariats that report to the governor to develop strategic actions for state agencies to prioritize the use of native plants on the state properties. So there are various different kinds of things to be done here, which is to identify places where restoration is needed, encourage state agencies to use the natives, and provide guidance on how to do restoration. So that bill is now signed, and hopefully inside the state government, we will see less use, if not zero use, of non-native plants, or certainly the invasive plants, as well as an emphasis on using the natives. Another bill that we were the primary drivers of it has several different things in it. The Virginia Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services now has the authority to set conditions under which permits are required to move noxious weeds or parts thereof. This was really important because we tried to get lots of additional plants put on the noxious weeds list, and were prevented from doing so because those plants could get bound up in a bale of hay or some other incidental movement, which would require the farmer or other person to go get a permit, and nobody wanted to have people breaking the law. So we had to get VDACs the flexibility to set conditions under which these permits are required. So that's now done. Now there's lots of regulation work to be done to implement that. That list of 90 invasive plants produced by the Department of Conservation and Recreation was published in 2014. They know it's out of date. They want to update it. And now there's a mandate to update that every 4 years. And more specifically, we also have a thing in there that says no state agency is going to plant, sell, or propagate plant on the DCR list except for scientific purposes. That's a big deal. And my personal favorite is the last one on this slide that says, hey, if you are a landscape architect or your business is installing plants, if you are going to install a plant that's on that DCR list of 90 plants, you have to tell the landowner that you are planting something that's on the DCR list of invasive plants. Because right now, a lot of people are planting these plants not knowing that, in fact, they're an invasive plant and a listed invasive plant to boot. So hopefully that will help prevent more, if you will, installations of these plants. Then lastly in here, one of our current activities is we are working on the design and implementation of a workshop to be held late this year. It's a working group, and we're looking to see somewhere around 50 to 70 people from Virginia organizations from all over the state who are interested in solving problems related to invasive plants. The idea is to come out of that workshop with 2 to 6 new initiatives that will be implemented statewide and managed by teams that are created through this workshop. Is got professionals on board, and we have a steering committee of about 15 people who are going to meet for the first time on May 8th, and they will be working on the planning and organizing of the workshop to be held late in the year. If you represent an organization in Virginia that would like to be included in this process, again, feel free to send a note to info@blueridgeprism.org. So that's all I've got. If you've got any other questions, feel free to send notes to info@blueridgeprism.org. And I have here one of our favorite pictures of Bradford pears running amok on the landscape. So I'm really looking forward to David Coyle's presentation. Now I'm going to turn this back to Rowena. So thank you, everybody, and stay tuned for the highlights of the day here.
Thanks, Rod. Appreciate it. Okay. So the highlight of our meeting is our presentation by our special guest, David Coyle. David Coyle teaches about forest health and invasive species in the Forestry Environmental Conservation Department at Clemson University. He is a member of the Society of American Foresters and the Entomological Society of America, serves on the board of directors for the North American Invasive Species Management Association, and is co-director of ProForest, which is an organization working to promote proactive forest pest management. Dr. Coyle has been instrumental in the success of South Carolina's Bradford Pear Bounty Program. Just really quick before he starts, we just ask that if you have questions for Dr. Coyle to please put it in the Q&A tab on your screen instead of the chat. The chat is for you to say hello or make just comments to us, but the Q&A is where we will answer your questions. And moderating the questions will be Beth Mizell, who is our executive director, and she will come on later to help facilitate the discussion. Finally, at the end of this program, there will be a survey that pops up once you log out of this, and we ask that you fill out the survey so we know what things we can do better for you next time. Without much ado, I would like to introduce Dr. David Coyle. David, we're so glad you're here with us today.
Thanks, Rowena. Now I can't share my screen, so I do need that enabled. I was able to in that practice, but not right. Oh, there it is. We're good.
Okay.
Just kidding. All right. Thank you, everyone, and welcome to today's talk all about Callery Pear. My name is Dave Coyle. As she said, I am at Clemson University. I've been there coming up on 6 years now. So let's dive in, shall we? Quickly, before we get going, this is what you're in for today if you're here and if you decide to stay the whole time. We're going to talk about some background on invasive plants, where they come from, what makes them invasive. Then we're going to dive into Bradford pear, what it is, what it does, how can we manage this beast, and then finally some public outreach opportunities, which is where we can talk about the bounty program a little bit. Before we do that, I have a disclaimer, and that's that I have opinions on this particular topic, as do most people who have a Bradford pear or Callery pear problem. So I'm going to give you plenty of peer-reviewed, legitimate research when I can. I'll let you know when that's legit, and I will also let you know when I'm giving you my opinion based on gut feeling or experience, okay? So before we start, let's talk about some terms, because invasive species terms are thrown out a whole lot. I want to make sure we're all on the same page. So native simply means a thing is from here. Now, whatever that organism is, whether it's an insect or a fungus or a plant, it's from here. The next logical question I get is, what does here mean? I typically think of here on a continental scale. If something is from North America, it is native to this continent. If it is from Europe or Asia or Australia, then obviously it is native to there. There's a number of terms that simply mean not from here, non-native, exotic, alien. All of these things just mean that organism did not develop and grow here when it became a thing, okay? Now, when we talk invasive species, this is essentially the worst of the worst, okay? So invasives are all not from here. They have established populations, established breeding populations. They typically cause some sort of damage, whether that's environmental, ecological, cost, human health. Any of these things are damaged, right? And they often displace native species. We see this a lot with plants. One thing to keep in mind is there's lots more non-native things here, many of which you probably don't even know about or haven't heard about. The invasives are the worst of the worst, and those are the ones we typically hear a lot about. Now, in terms of all non-native plants, are they all bad? You could say no. Most non-native plants are not bad. In fact, a lot of them are what we use for food. And with plants in particular, because they don't move well, there's a lot of kind of context that has to go with it, because it depends on whether they're bad or not. Now, this is a photo of bamboo next to Callery pear. This is probably my second least favorite plant species ever. But in this particular case, it's on the side of a building. It's in a space about 3 feet wide by 20 feet long. It is completely contained by concrete. It's not going anywhere, right? So in some cases, whether or not a non-native invasive plant is bad kind of depends on location, but also pest biology. Bamboo is such a thing where it typically spreads underground, right, through its roots and rhizomes. It will flower, but it's usually it takes decades to flower. A lot of bamboo, and some of it won't even flower at all and spread seed. So something like this, if it's in a completely controlled environment, it's not going anywhere. Okay, we get in trouble with bamboo when it's on the landscape. Now, switching gears, is this non-native plant bad? And I would argue this is one of, if not the worst non-native plants we have. Obviously, we will have more to come on this in a moment. But how did we get in this predicament in the first place, where we are all sitting here listening, watching a screen and listening to a guy in an orange shirt talk about invasive plants? This all started when the country was getting colonized, obviously, and things were brought over here from different places for two primary reasons. First, being they were a reminder of home. People came from Europe or wherever, and they wanted something in their yard that reminded them of the place they came from. The other typical way things got over here is people thought it was a business opportunity. Okay, Chinese tallow tree, which is very common in the southeastern coastal plain, that was brought over because it was thought at the time, remember this was late 1700s or so, that we could boil down the seeds and get the wax and use that tallow to make candles. And before electricity, candles were all the rage. So if you had a candle factory, you were sitting pretty, right? So that's why a lot of these things came over here. And the interesting thing about plants is we have really good records on when a lot of these actually got to this country or this continent, because there's just detailed records. It was brought in for a state, the World's Fair, or brought in for some sort of forage trial, or brought in for some sort of horticultural thing. People have records of when non-native plants came in. It's much different than non-native insects and fungi, because a lot of times those things come in and we don't know they're there for a while until we start seeing the destruction and the trees dying and that type of thing. So very different. You'll see Callery Pear on here in 1908. That is when this one came to North America. So most invasive plants, when they get here, they're usually introduced as one of two things: ornamentals or forages. Ornamentals being something pretty people plant on the landscape, forages being something you grow to feed an animal. Okay, and it's really interesting if you look at the characteristics that make a great forage plant and the characteristics that make a great invasive species. If you put those side by side, which this table does, it's basically the same thing. You want something that grows fast, reproduces easily and by multiple methods, is super tolerant of all sorts of conditions, and it doesn't have any real predators, which most non-native things do not have when they get to a new environment. So that is one thing to keep in mind. And like, we just mentioned, very few things eat invasive plants because these plants have not evolved with the local herbivores. Okay, this just shows you that percent of leaf damage is much higher on the non-invasive stuff as it is the invasive stuff. One of the characteristics of invasive species, invasive plants anyway, is that not really anything eats them. There's also this ability of some plants to really adapt to where they are and almost change their behavior and their growth behavior. These two figures show that where there's this non-native plant and it's growing at the leading edge of its non-native population, those plants at the leading edge have more leaf area and they actually grow faster than the ones do that are already kind of in the back of the pack. Interestingly enough, the plant I'm talking about here is loblolly pine, right? Common pine species across lots of the Southeast. In South America, it is not native and it is quite an aggressive invading species. Invasive plants make a lot of seeds. Okay, this is probably of no surprise to most people. This is a good little study done with Ailanthus altissima, tree of heaven. And they showed, I should say, that in a 40-year-old tree's lifetime, about 10 million seeds are produced. And that is a lot of seeds, but it's even worse when you think that the viability of those seeds is about 65%. So that means from one tree, 40 years, you're looking at 6.5 million viable potential seedlings out of that one particular tree. And then non-native species, invasives in particular, are very good at colonizing disturbed areas. Okay, this is from Australia, but you see things like this all the time on fire breaks, where there's new construction. One of the characteristics of invasive species is the ability to colonize somewhere that's not optimal for a lot of other species. And then there's very hardy roots and rhizomes. Okay, this is, lots of invasive plants have this way basically as a way of coping for bad conditions. Exclusive dense infestations. This is Cogon grass down in Florida. This light green grass basically pushes everything else out and makes these dense monocultures of Cogon grass. This is common for a lot of things. Callery pear is one of them too. We'll see that in just a minute. And then just their ability to grow in the worst environmental conditions. Okay, this is Phragmites growing on the side of the road. And it just, when you think about, if you do any gardening, which I do, it's often interesting to think about the tolerance of different plants to different environmental conditions. And this is probably my favorite meme of all these. You've got these roses that people take so much care of. And if you have even the pH off a little bit, they're just going to die. And then you've got something like dandelions, which will grow out of the crack of a sidewalk at the drop of a hat. It just shows the difference between a cultivated plant and a weed species, an invasive weed species. They can grow anywhere. And then there's allelopathic chemicals that are common in invasive plants. Probably the most famous around in North America, one of the more famous allelopathy stories is black walnut. Juglus nigrans, gives off this chemical juglone on the roots. That's why not really anything will grow underneath a black walnut. Well, lots of invasive plants do the same thing. This was a study done with just lettuce in the greenhouse. And so they took this, so you're looking at seedling mass as it goes up. You've got this white snake root, which is a native with a known allelopathic effect. And you see how it sort of makes the lettuce grow less. And then this is Japanese stiltgrass, Microstegium, and it does the same thing. So that also tells you that that particular invasive also has some allelopathy in it as well. And then there's the sit and wait strategy. And a lot of plants, especially invasives, have this where they'll kind of establish in the understory and just sort of hang out there as a little plant. And they're basically waiting for some big disturbance, right? Going back to disturbance. And then when that disturbance hits, boom, they shoot up and they take over things very, very quickly. Now, for all invasive plants here in the Southeast, there's a couple of books that are absolutely excellent. This is one of them by the Forest Service. This is another one. You can go to try to get some of those. I don't think there's many in press anymore, but these are available online. There's lots of apps out there. The biggest key that I always sort of preach to people is before you do any management, you've got to know exactly what you're dealing with. So knowing which invasive species you're trying to work with is key, and these things can help you do that. Are there any questions so far? Beth, did you want to do any questions right now, or you want me to keep rolling?
Well, we did have, so thank you, David. We did have a couple of questions. We had one from Patricia. Where do you stand on naturalized plants, such as those that have been here for hundreds of years? Are they all bad?
That's going to depend on so here's Dave's opinion now, right? Remember the dude, this is my opinion. I think it depends on what their impacts are. Some things are able to, I guess, naturalize and just sort of become part of the ecosystem, and others are going to just completely, crowd out things. I guess it just, it depends on what your tolerance is, and you can make the case that anything that's non-native that naturalizes is essentially pushing out a native species. Yes, that's true. But, if there are not any negative effects demonstrated, I don't want to see you turn a blind eye, but, I guess there are bigger fish to fry would probably be my answer there. So it all kind of gets down to your tolerance. And at the end of the day, there's limited resources that we as an invasive species community have to put towards these things. And a big part of what we need to do is prioritize. And sometimes that means if it's a naturalized thing that isn't really doing a whole lot, you kind of let it go.
All right. Thank you, David.
Mm-hmm.
And we also had a question about aggressive native plants. And the example that was used was Virginia creeper. I happen to love Virginia creeper and manage it in my personal native garden, but it does need managing. Can you speak a little bit about aggressive native plants? And some people like to call them invasive, but why are they not invasive?
Yeah, I thought you were going to say sweet gum because that's the one we always do.
Yeah, down there. Yeah.
Aggressive invader. If it is native to this continent, it is by definition not invasive. Okay, invasive species are non-native and then they have other things. But if they're not non-native, if they're native, they're by definition not an invasive species. Is it aggressive? Of course it's aggressive, and there's lots of aggressive things, creeper, sweet gum, so on and so forth. Those are aggressive by no fault of their own. So I look at it as, well, sure, they need to be managed in some cases in some areas, but otherwise they're just a part of the ecosystem, and they serve a role as, a rung in succession. So that's, I guess, my take on them. Yeah, I mean, some of those things are a pain, and you basically treat them like you would treat, from a management perspective, you treat them like a non-native. I'm thinking, especially in forestry, right? Sweet gum is one of the biggest things we got to wipe out if we're trying to re-establish forest stands. That's why we do a lot of the burns, but it's a native species, so it's serving a purpose. So another big difference is lots of things eat sweet gum. Insects eat sweet gum, so it's food for a lot of stuff, whereas some of these invasive things, nothing eats them. So that's the big difference to me.
All right, thanks for that, David. And let's do one more question.
Okay.
Question about one of your slides.
Mhm.
What did AGAL and MIVI stand for in your earlier slide?
Yes, so those are just shorthand for the species name. So Microstegium viminium is MIVI. And I'll be honest, I forgot what the scientific name of white snakeroot is, but that's what those mean. That's a very common, I guess, scientific way to just shorten our genus and species. You take the first two letters of genus and the first two letters of species and mash it together. So Callery Pear would be PYCA if you were to do it that way.
Okay,
Mhm.
thanks. I think that's all at this time. So if you'd like
Let's-
to continue on.
Let's keep on. In that case, let's get to the good stuff. Okay, let's talk about Callery Pear, also known as Bradford pear, the species Pyrus calleriana, or PYCA, if that is your thing. Here is our topic du jour. I will concede that it does have very pretty flowers. Those flowers come with a bit of an odor, and I've heard it described a lot of things in my career so far. This is probably my favorite description out of Business Insider in 2013. Smells like rotting fish and semen. It has a pungent scent, and we will leave it at that. Okay, let's talk about how did we get to this place, the Bradford pear origin story. Okay, so we have to go back a ways to the late 1800s, where in the Western US, they were starting to kind of get out of ranching. Not all of them, but some people were getting out of ranching, and they were starting to look for new crops. Okay, one of the things that they started to grow were some of these fruiting trees. At the same time, there was this USDA wing called, or section called the Foreign Seed and Plant Introduction Office. And this was started in 1898, and its mission was to locate and import economically important plants from around the world. And I'm going to pause you for just a minute there. Hindsight being 2020, this is an absolutely horrible idea, right? This is exactly why people like me have a job today, is because we had a government agency who at the time thought it was a good idea to bring things from different countries over here to try to use them for economic purposes and economic gain. Now, they did not know that things would go as they would go, but it's just a really interesting anecdote to me that we used to have a branch of our federal government whose whole mission was to get stuff from other countries and bring it over and plant it, essentially, and see what happened. Anyway, we all make mistakes, do we not? So as this was happening in the early 1900s, there were orchards of these edible pears, the French pear, Pyrus communis, and fire blight was beginning to be a really, really big problem. Now, fire blight is a bacterial disease that affects the leaves and the fruit. So you can see here, it basically makes the branch end, the leaves and fruit just kind of dry up. This bacteria was spread by pollinators, which, if you know anything about pears, you know that they need to be pollinated to make fruit. So this is a big issue and not something easily overcome, right? So we had this fire blight, and what they wanted to do was they had to test some sort of Pyrus rootstock that would help, that they could graft to the fruit producing pears to try to make edible pears. And they had known that there was a couple species of Pyrus in Asia that were relatively resistant to fire blight. So that's what they wanted to try to acquire. So in 1908, Ernest Wilson, and he worked for the Arnold Arboretum, which is at Harvard up in Massachusetts. He had gone over and he brought back the first Pyrus calleriana to North America, Ernest Wilson. And so they did a few trials. Things looked like they were working pretty well, but they needed some more material. Okay. So they enlisted this guy, Frank Meyer. Now, Frank Meyer was well known as a successful foreign plant explorer, in which I mean, at the time, foreign plant exploring means you sailed across the ocean, you hiked on foot or on animal, you collected these things, you basically survived and came back alive. That's what made you successful. But this guy was really good at it. He brought a lot of stuff back. There's a lot of different cultivars of things that we owe to Frank Meyer, so much that there's a medal named after him for some of the scientific societies. And if you've ever eaten a Meyer lemon, those are named after Frank Meyer. So he was very good at what he did. He collected Pyrus calleriana in China beginning in 1916 to about 1918. He sent back 100 pounds of seed. Now, this is impressive because it basically takes 5,000 pounds of fresh Callery pear fruit to make 25 pounds of seed. So that is a whole bunch. Think about how much one of those seeds weighed. He collected about 20,000 pounds of that stuff and sent it back. Tragically, he did die during that trip. I know I just talked him up for being really good at what he did, but things happen. This is back in the early 1900s and people did not live long overall. So he ended up drowning in the river, but his stuff had gotten sent back. So he got all this seed back to the US and it worked essentially, right? It helped basically save that edible pear industry. And what they ended up doing was the grafting thing. So they took a scion or a shoot from an edible pear, you cut it to fit into the rootstock and you tape the things together, you shove it in the ground and they grow as one tree, right? So, and this is very common for most of the fruit trees we have kind of all over now. A lot of them are grafted. So you've got essentially something on the bottom that's really good at growing anywhere. And then the top part is where you're getting your fruit from. Getting back to our origin story. So they had all this seed, they had to make outplantings. They had some planted in the Pac Northwest, and they also had several planted at the U.S. Plant Introduction Sale in Glendale, Maryland, which is kind of central Maryland there. At the time, this guy, John Creech, was the horticulturalist in charge, and he noticed that there were some of these Pyrus calleriana individuals that had might have had some horticultural value. They were disease resistant, drought resistant, pollution resistant. Remember, they kind of grow anywhere. One of those selections was thornless. One particular tree, it was really pretty, and wow, you just can't kill the thing. He named it Bradford after his former station director, and I actually found a picture of John Creech back in 2004. He had relocated to Columbus, North Carolina. At the time, he was 84. I'm fairly certain that means he is no longer with us. But I will say, after reading that article, he was a 100% Bradford pear apologist, saw no problem with having Bradford pears. He just thought people needed to prune them the right way. And the reason this particular tree was named after Bradford is that these two, John Creech and his boss at the time, F.C. Bradford, were hiking around the grounds, inspecting these trees, and Bradford dropped dead of a heart attack right there. And so, tragic as that may be, he decided to name the tree after it. So that is how we have the tree named Bradford pear. So with that one particular tree, which he thought was so awesome, it is now a grafted cultivar. So same process they used before. So you've got these scions of the Bradford shoot, and you've got the bottom being just Pyrus calleriana rootstock. Okay, so that means in every Bradford pear that was produced, the top is genetically identical. The bottom is just the same species, but different genetics. Okay, so that means Bradfords and Callery pears look similar because they're all the same species. Bradfords are Pyrus calleriana. It's just that Bradford is one particular individual, right? It would be like if you wanted to clone me and you cut me off at the waist and you put a bunch of copies of my top only onto a bunch of different people's legs. That's essentially what a Bradford pear is, okay? The main difference between Bradford and Callery Pear is the thorns. That's the one thing everybody talks about. So on top, I've got a branch of Bradford and I've got my Callery down. Underneath here, we always tie a brightly colored ribbon around it so people just don't go grabbing it blindly. And you can see there's thorns all over the place. There's a little bit of difference too in terms of how they grow. Bradfords tend to have that very much of a round lollipop type shape, whereas Callery has more of it's just a longer type of shape as it gets grown wild. So they made these Bradford pears, they tested them out, they realized that it had some commercial value. They released it in 1961, and they actually found that even by the mid 60s, that thing had escaped cultivation, which should have been a major red flag. But of course, lots of money was being poured into getting these things planted all over the Southeast, especially even up into the northern part of this half of the country. Structural problems were noticed, but because of the money coming in, that didn't really stop anyone. They just tried to keep creating these new cultivars to atone for the issues. I have so many pictures of Bradford pears that have fallen apart. You might remember this fella. He's your state speaker. So here's one after a storm. Here's a Bradford pear after an ice storm. You see it just completely falls. And then here's one from Indiana, where you can see this one just fell on a car. And there's lots of, you can make all the jokes you want about how weak they are. If you look at them wrong, if you breathe on them wrong. This was my favorite quote. It says, "A good fart will snap one of these." And I feel like that is almost perfect because it takes basically no effort whatsoever to make one of these things break. What else did they know about Bradford pears? I mean, by they, I mean the people that created this thing. They knew that Bradford pear alone could not make a viable seed with another Bradford pear because they're self-incompatible. So, but if you've got pollen from any other pyrus, it could make a seed. So what that basically means, if you have this fictional town and the only trees planted in there were Bradford pear, none of those would make a viable seed because that's all pollen from the same genetically same individual. It just takes that one neighbor, and we all know the one neighbor that plants a different cultivar even. Could be a Chanticleer, aristocrat, what have you. And then now you've got two different kinds of pollen, two different cultivars of pollen, two different individuals producing pollen. And you can have all sorts of cross-pollination and viable seeds everywhere. And you can see this with some of these trees, you know, knowing that a Bradford is a grafted cultivar, so what's on the bottom is not really, it's not what's on the top. And you can see it in some of these, and that the picture on the left, this is a buddy of mine in Pennsylvania. The initial rootstock, a shoot came up and it basically grew as big as the shoot next to it. And one of these shoots at the same time is basically fully leafed out and the other is just starting. You can see the same thing on the side. You can see the bunch of stems there. So something probably broke and regrew. If it's one tree, it's all going to flower at once. You're not going to have half a tree flowering and half not flowering. So you're seeing basically two different individuals growing as one at the same time there. So they knew that this was an issue. Their response was basically a shoulder shrug. I think one of the quotes once was, "Do you realize how many kids this tree has put through college?" So seeds everywhere. And let's talk about that seed production and maybe more accurately, fruit production. This is a tree from down where I live here in North Georgia. I did this 3 years ago. I don't even remember why I was out there, but I went out. I found one shoot. It was this one. It was a branch I could reach. So that branch was about head high on me. It's a fairly good sized tree. It was a 42-inch long stem and had 23 little shoots on it. So here is the shoot, just me holding it. And here's that same shoot with all the leaves picked off it. And you can see, look at all those fruits on there. And much to my wife's chagrin, I brought this back inside the house, took it all apart on the table so I wouldn't lose anything. And here's the pile of seed I got from that one shoot. Remember, 42 inches long. I got 200 live fruits with 12 dead ones. And keep in mind that each fruit typically has 3 to 5 seeds. So you're looking at, in just that little pile, possibly 1,000 seeds. It's an amazing amount of seed production that happens on a mature tree. These things will start making seed when they're 3-4 years old. We have lots of seed work ongoing. We don't really know the germination rate. of those seeds. We do know that they can be persistent in the seed bank for up to 10, 11 years. So it makes it's a very challenging invasive species because of how much it reproduces. And then it reproduces by suckers too. We'll talk about that as well. But so because of some of these things, this is why we are in the position we are in, right? This is why we have wild Callery pear in old fields. You see the arrows pointing here. You've got them along roadsides. They're typically the first thing that becomes white every spring. You've got them in unsold lots, very common in unsold lots in towns across the southeastern US. We have them in forests as well. And I know for a long time, people said, Callery pear is just a problem on ditches and old fields. That is not the case. You know, we are finding it, particularly down here in Georgia and South Carolina, more and more invading mature canopies. Okay, this is a 20-ish year old longleaf pine stand, and you've got the whole understory is just covered in young Callery pear. So it's definitely a problem. And we're seeing it in pastures too, things that are very, grazed heavily. It just takes one of those things to get going. They don't really get eaten by anything. And then once they get thorns, stuff just avoids them. So you've got all these Callery pears popping up in pastures as well. One of the questions we get asked a lot is, well, how prevalent is this on the landscape? I know from just my travels and talking to people, it's basically everywhere. And I don't think that's really reflected in the EdMaps, which is some of the human or people reported areas. This is probably closer to where it is. The future range, I mean, you just see this stuff all over this part of the country. How much is really out there is really tough to tell. We know we can detect it very easily in the spring. This is a shot from a drone club at Wichita that shows those nice white Callery pears early in the spring next to some conifers. They just completely pop out. There's really only been one study that looked at how much was on the landscape. I know it's a big table, but the thing to look at is density, stems per hectare. Keep in mind, hectare is about 2.5 football fields in size or so. The maximum they saw was about 57,000 stems per acre. So think of a football field and think of 57,000 stems in that one area. There's a wide variability, of course, but it's all over out there. It is so common on the landscape. That's some of the work we're trying to do now, is use some of this aerial imagery and some checking, on the ground to figure out, well, how much is actually out there. There are two prime native lookalikes, and I put this in kind of last minute because I saw some questions Rowena had sent me. What are the things that look like they might be Callery pear? Callery is about the first thing that blooms early in the spring. And there's really only two things that are going to be remotely close. The first thing is going to be Chickasaw plum, Prunus angustifolia. These flowers are similar, but not if you look close to them. I mean, yeah, it's a little white flower, but the stems are much different. The clusters of flowers on Callery pear are much more. There are many more of them in a cluster. And it's got a very, very different look to it. The big key for me is just looking out on the landscape. Okay, so here is a Pyrus calleriana and a Prunus angustifolia. Here's your Callery pear. It's the one that's tall. It's a tree, right? Chickasaw plum is a shrub, and it never really gets over 5, 6, 7, 8 feet tall tops. It tends to grow as a great big shrubby layer. It'll have those same white flowers, but it's not going to have an individual that sticks way up like that Callery pear does. So those two keys, just the shape of the growth and the flowers themselves are very different. The other one you're going to see is going to be black cherry, wild black cherry, Prunus serratina. Honestly, this one usually flowers a bit after Callery pear. I only have it in here because sometimes the early flowering black cherry can kind of match up with the late flowering Callery pear, but the flowers look completely different, right? Black cherry flowers are kind of longish, and they're tiny little bunch of little inflorescences on there. And then the Callery pear again have that sort of ball. So they look very, very different. The other thing is Callery pear blooms before the leaves come out, typically, right? And black cherry is going to leaf out and then put those white flowers. Callery pear is going to be white flowers, and then the flowers fade and the leaves come in. So timing is a lot of that too. But who cares really? Because, oh my gosh, this is such a beautiful tree, right? This is why this thing was planted all over the region all these years ago, because it was absolutely gorgeous. And like I said, I can see that it is quite pretty. The thorns, honestly, are one of the big issues, is the thorns and some of these other things. So let's talk about those. Let's talk about why Pyrus calleriana is the worst tree, okay, the impacts so far. Well, here is Callery Pear on the landscape, and we have done some genetic work. Shawani Sapkota did a great job. She did her master's with me. She was at Tennessee. She did all this good genetic work that essentially showed that if you wanted to create the perfect invasive plant, you would have all the characteristics genetically that Callery Pear has. High number of alleles, high diversity, high gene flow, all these things that make it highly adaptable to new environments. Callery Pear has that. And in fact, if you go back to some of Meyer's original writing, he writes about how many places this thing can grow in. This is from a letter he wrote back in 1917 to a guy back here. He writes that this thing grows all sorts of conditions. Let me read over here. One time on dry, sterile mountain slopes, then again with its roots in standing water at the edge of a pond, sometimes in open pine forest, then again among scrub on ledges in the burning sun, sometimes in low bamboo jungle. This thing grows everywhere, and they've known that for ages, and that's one of the reasons it makes a good rootstock, because it will grow anywhere. That's also one of the problems you have, is it grows anywhere. This is this little horse, and I forget the horse's name, but this was the horse that was in this pasture, and this poor little pony, when it was little, did not know any better, and it got its face completely tore up by all the thorns on these Callery Pear plants in this pasture. And she was the owner was asking, well, how could this happen? And by golly, you look right over to the side. If you look just kind of in the lower left, you'll see the pasture, and boom, here's two great big mother trees, right? So these are where the birds are going to sit. They're going to eat those fruits. They're going to fly out over the pasture and do what birds do, is poop on stuff. And then you've got new trees growing up. And then again, these things grow fast. So here's Alex. Now, keep in mind, Alex is fairly short. She's about just over 5 feet tall. But this is one season of growth on this particular Callery Pear. This was in August or September. That thing was probably 7 feet tall in 1 year. So when they do take root, they grow ridiculously fast. And then, it's really interesting to look aerially at some of these things we see. So this is a little spot near where I live. Here's a row of Bradford pear trees. And then you can see the birds presumably go in there, gorge themselves, fly out over the open field. And you can see all the Callery Pear trees as they fly out. And if you notice, the density of Callery Pears is closest by the road, because that's where they, first place they go before they poop. And then the farther away you get, it's kind of less and less dense. The trees also are a little bit smaller. So it shows you a gradient in terms of both their size and their density. The Callery Pear canopy is thick. So this is a very Callery Pear thicket. I just walked underneath it and looked up and took a picture, and it is shaded, so there's that. But then if you look down, there's not a whole lot is going to grow under that thing. So it will allow some Callery Pear seedlings to grow, but that is really about it. So these things provide almost no ecological value. And let's start with birds. So birds are the yin and yang here, right? Birds are the reason a lot of these things are spreading all over the place. But birds are also one of the groups that are most affected by having Bradford pear and any non-native plant on the landscape. Most birds depend on insects to raise their young. In particular, look at a chickadee. Tiny little thing, takes thousands of caterpillars to raise a clutch of chickadees. And there was some really good work done by Doug Tallamy and Desiree Narango, who was a student of his, where they looked up in the DC area, Maryland, DC area, and they looked at the impact of non-native plants on birds, okay? And what they essentially found was where you have more baby birds, you have less non-native plants, right? And where there's more non-native plants, there's less baby birds. So where you've got all these non-native plants, this just represents an area where there's probably no caterpillars. And if there's no caterpillars, that means there's no food for these birds. And so what we're just trying to, no insects is no birds. So having these things on the landscape, when you've got a field full of Callery Pear, that basically means there's nothing there for birds to eat. Okay, and they've got to go elsewhere to get their stuff. The decomposing community is another thing from an ecological perspective that we'd like to look at the impacts of non-natives on. Maybe we're not sure yet. This is still in progress. We started a study a couple of years ago, 2 years ago now, where we just took bundles of twigs and we hung these things up. We're looking at some preliminary data that shows that, Callery pear is not the worst. There's still plenty of stuff that will attack a dead twig. And so this represents that community. When a tree falls in the woods, whether anyone hears it or not, a bunch of stuff has to go break it down. A lot of those things that do that are typically insects. And so lots of generalist things will affect Callery pear, but still it's not as much as some of the native stuff like you see Liriodendron tulipifera on the end there. We've also started looking at larger logs, right? So that was just little twigs. This is Clayton Traylor. He's a PhD student at Georgia. We cut down some trees, we put some logs out to let them get colonized. And then we have this cool process where they hang them in bundles. You put a bag around them and you hook an air hose up to them. And it basically keeps air flowing and it gives them, we can give them 3, 6, 12 months for all the insects to come out of there. And then they drop into those little pink cups on the bottom so we can see what developed inside there. We haven't finished this yet. So there are, I'm convinced there's going to be some ecological impacts here. They're just not, we just haven't measured them yet. And one thing about Callery pear in general is measuring the impacts of something like this takes time. And honestly, it's only been the last few years that people have started caring enough to do research on it. So there's lots of research that is in progress or not done yet. It's just kind of where we are with this particular thing. And then about impacts and costs from management activities, we know these can be significant. Now, why are you showing me a tractor, Dave? And I'm showing you this because Callery pear thorns are commonly known as being strong enough to pop tires. I have heard this countless times, people losing lots of money to tire repair, losing time to get it repaired. There have been cases where certain loggers will not go into stands if they have rubber tracked things. Because of the Callery pear, you've got to get something in there with a metal track. So there's lots of issues that come from having these things there. Not to mention, if you've got a field or an old field or forest that's overrun with these things, it takes time and money to clear those things out of there, right? You've got to buy the product, which especially now is not cheap at all. All these chemicals are pretty expensive. Takes time, takes machines, takes people. All of these things represent a cost to try to get these things eliminated. Beth, do we have any questions so far?
Yes, we do have a few questions, David. I wondered if you could go back and clarify the difference between Callery pear and Bradford pear.
Sure.
And because there's some confusion about which is which and how they're different, how they're the same.
All Bradford pears and Callery pears are the same species, Pyrus calleriana. The difference is a Bradford pear started from one individual. One single tree was found to have all the characteristics, no thorns, pretty, round, all that. And they basically took cuttings of that tree, put them onto rootstocks of any Pyrus calleriana and made an assembly line of Bradford pears that way. Okay. So the Callery pear you see out on the landscape, their parentage could be almost anything. It could be half Bradford and half Pyrus communis. It could be half Bradford and half some random Pyrus calleriana. It could be Pyrus calleriana, just two wild parents as well. The difference is Bradford pears are made via grafting, and the only place you'll see a true Bradford pear is planted in someone's lawn or on the landscape. If it's just growing out wild, it is no longer a Bradford pear. It is a Callery pear. Does that make sense?
Well, it makes sense to me, but it is, it does get confusing when we think about all the cultivars and the history of the plant.
Another way to think about it is all those cultivars, whether it's Bradford or Aristocrat or what have you, they are only present like they can only be planted by a person. If it is planted by anything natural like a bird or raccoon or what have you, that is no longer a cultivar. That is a wild Callery pear.
So
Okay.
the cultivars, they revert back to the wild Callery pear, and that's what we see escaping into forest and fields. Is that a
Yes.
good clarification summary?
Yeah, the cultivar itself doesn't revert back. It's the seeds made by that cultivar.
Okay.
A lot of times those cultivars are marketed as sterile, but that only means that pollen from the same cultivar cannot pollinate itself. It can't pollinate itself,
Mhm.
right? So a Bradford cannot pollinate a Bradford, but a Bradford could get pollinated by a Chanticleer or an Aristocrat or a wild Callery.
Okay. I think that helps, and I hope it helps some out in our audience. And
It is tricky and confusing. I
it
know.
is very tricky. Yeah. And so we did have another question. You had mentioned someone asked if you could provide the link from the Bradford pear story about the
Oh, you cut out there, Beth. What was that? The link from the what?
about that.
The link from the Bradford pear history story?
Yeah,
Yeah, I can do that.
I think that's what they were asking for.
Yeah.
So maybe if you could drop that in the chat, maybe at the end of the program.
You got it.
Thank you.
All right, let's move on here.
Yep, let's
Sorry,
go ahead.
let's-
Thank you, David.
Yep. So is there anything good about this tree? And every now and again, you'll get a Bradford pear apologist. And for the love of God, don't get me started. But look, we're going to go through it because I wanted to be complete today, okay? There is some value as a rootstock. Believe it or not, some fruit growers will even dig up wild Callery pears, to which I say, oh, you're digging them up. That is great. They take those and they graft on fruit and you've still got a Callery pear root there. So I know you're trying to take something out there and make something good of it, but there are very few cases where this is going to do anything really beneficial other than on one person's land, right? And okay, fine. Like if you can keep all of the Callery pear sprouts off your grafted cultivar and you're going to baby it and just get your fruit out of there, fine, that can work. That'll never be a control or management option large scale. Okay. It is still sold as a landscape tree, which shocks me, but goodness, you can buy this thing anywhere at this point. You still do see it at big box stores. Again, it's usually not the Bradford cultivar. Now there's different cultivars, but it's the same essential thing. It's all Pyrus calleriana. I have been made to concede that yes, they do tree things, right? They are photosynthesizing. They provide some structure and cover. They occasionally are used by birds for nesting. We've seen shrikes stab their little, big grasshopper on there or something. But then does the good outweigh the bad? That is what I always ask people. Yeah, okay, they're green, they're making oxygen, but it just doesn't matter. They're not doing enough good to justify their existence in my mind. And that is my hard line, and I am sticking to it. And at this point, with all the wild Callery pear and different Pyrus cultivars out there, there's zero chance that if you plant a Bradford and think that you're not going to have viable seeds, that is absolutely, it's just not going to happen. So anyone that plants one is essentially contributing to the problem that we already have. So, and I know there's some apologists out there. Again, this is a tree we should promote for rootstocks. And I just, again, think of the overall issue and stop doing that is what I would beg people that write these articles. Anyway, so now that we know where we are, what do we do now with Callery pear? How do we manage this thing? Here, there's a bunch of different options for invasive plant management. You can hand pull them or girdle them. Is that an option for Callery pear? Maybe for these, if they're true seedlings, you can pluck them up pretty easy. But if it's a sprout on a root, it's going to break and just resprout. That's hand pulling. Can you girdle a Callery pear? I mean, you can girdle it, but come on, it's just going to completely resprout again. I mean, in this case, the part that we actually cut and put on the ground started throwing up shoots, and then it started throwing up roots where nodes were touching the ground. So it's incredibly, incredibly hardy. If you do cut down the Bradford pear, we have this issue with a lot of folks at the bounty. You have only done half of the job. You absolutely have to use herbicide. If you do not do that, you will get a massive sprout response. Grazing is another invasive plant control option. Can you do this? I highly doubt you can graze Callery pear and maybe on the thornless seedlings. But again, once they get thorns, it's tough to get anything to eat that stuff. That said, no one's really tried it. So who knows, right? Mechanical or cultural control, bamboo is your sort of prototypical thing we use for that. Does this work on Callery pear? Sometimes you can dig things up. I mean, you can dig anything up with a backhoe, but it takes some big equipment. The other management option you have is you can bush hog them if you get to them before they get too big to start poking holes in everything. Okay, that's the whole key. They can be bush hogged that first year or so. They're pretty flexible. So you basically have to do that almost every year. If you leave a year, they're going to get too big to bush hog and too woody. They grow too fast. Burning is another one. Can you burn Callery pear? A lot of this we don't know. It probably would work on seeds and maybe the fruit. I say that because there's some studies from Russian olive that showed where you burned seeds, you get almost no generation after a hot fire. Same thing with those little seedlings. Like that stuff works pretty well. Can you burn saplings? Hard no there. All you're going to do is anger it at that point. So this is a study from Indiana where you looked at sprouts before the fire, 0. After the fire, you had 3 to 4 sprouts per fire. Here was another study up in Ohio where she actually looked at cutting, burning, and freezing these things. Here's your stem cut only. So you see the number of sprouts. There's over, about a dozen sprouts per stem after you just cut it, which is about the same when you burn it and just a few more than when you freeze it. So that just means if you, and her final thing there is herbicide. You got to use herbicide on these things. And we've done some of that work too. We looked after a burn down here in Georgia and between 2 to 12 resprouts per sapling. I mean, the stuff, top kills it nice. You're going to feel good, but boom, it comes back hot and heavy after that. Mature trees, I doubt it. I think the bark just gets too thick and it's not going to work. Biocontrol, air potato leaf beetle works great, but for Callery pear, it's just not going to happen. Again, nothing eats it, right? Doug Tallamy has said some of this stuff before. There's like hardly anything that eats Callery pear. We thought, well, that's up north. What's happening down south, right? Here's all the things I've seen eating Callery pear. And trust me when I say I've looked at a lot of these things in my time. I've seen aphids on there. I've seen what I think was thrips. I saw a bagworm. Now, granted, that's not Callery pear. I did it in my camera at the time, but trust me, it was a bagworm on a Callery, and that's it. Like, I do not see stuff eating that. We decided to do a quick study a couple of years ago to see. We took 3 really, and just to see, does anything eat it at all? We took 3 very common polyphagous herbivores. They eat practically anything. We put them through a series of choice and no choice tests. So in some cases, all they had to eat was Callery pear. In other cases, they had Callery and some of their other favorites. Short answer is no, not really. And we also surveyed out in the wild to see how much stuff was on there. The long story short is that most of those insects would rather die than eat Callery pear. And that's what we found. They ate the other stuff. If you forced them to eat Callery pear, most of them just died. So no, they're not going to eat it, which brings us to herbicides. Okay. Obviously, herbicides, you got to be careful with these, follow the label. I was going to talk about some of the active ingredients because of time. I'm going to skip some of these really quick here. Glyphosate is a super common one, right? We're going to move through some of these real quick. If you've got herbicide questions at the end, I'm happy to take those. But I want to make sure we get to some of this other stuff. So the key, though, is herbicide an option for Callery pear? And this is the good news. This is where we come to the good news, right? We've done a number of trials, as have some other folks. This is one we'll talk about in South Carolina and Georgia. And this is sort of, we call it small trees. Okay, so 5-6 feet tall. We set up a replicated experiment. Now, not every plot was a perfect square, but we had, 10 to 12 trees in each plot. And we had a number of different active ingredients, and they all worked. The one exception was when we had some hexazinone that didn't get enough water in time. And so it just didn't work, but everything else works really well. So this was encouraging. We moved on and did some larger trees. We added Kansas to our list. They've got a bunch out there. Hack and squirt and cut stump method. There's Ryan Armbrust with Kansas Forest Service. He's super happy to cut these things down. And you can see we got pretty good results here. Some of them died really well. Some of them took a while to die. We are still actively going through this data right now. This is on my to-do list when I'm done here today. I think the big take home is any cut stump treatment works like a charm. You cut that thing off, you spray or rub on herbicide on that fresh cut, you're not going to have any resprouts whatsoever. Hack and squirt does pretty good. Some of the soil injectable stuff is really touchy because you have to get the right type of moisture at the right time. So maybe not, but we're not totally through this data yet. So this is very preliminary. Part of the issue with all of this is that it's still so easy to buy these things, right? I mean, you've got stuff promoted all the time. You can buy these things all over the place. You can buy them online, and that's one of the big issues. And that sort of leads me into what can we do from an outreach perspective. And this brings us to the Bradford Pear Bounty Program. Okay, so we started this in 2020. The way it works in South Carolina is it's sponsored and basically put together by the South Carolina Forestry Commission, akin to your VDOF, and then us. And then we work with someone else to do this. So what we do, Clemson, we do all the advertising, make all the logos, we do a lot of the PR, all the interviews, that type of thing. That is our job, right, is to promote this thing. And I'll tell you, when you get these programs that targets a really, really common, well-known tree, a lot of news picks this up and it gets a lot of coverage. We set up a website with lots of information for people to talk about what is the pear and why is it bad and what the program does. Roles of the Forestry Commission, on the ground help. Dina Whitesides with our South Carolina Forestry Commission does a ton with us in terms of helping municipalities choose which species to go back in. And then that local municipality, they're basically our local arrangements, right? They're holding it on the ground, they're finding a place, they're taking care of the trees, they're getting them there. While we do each of this, we get a little bit of a survey for people. We know how many trees we have given away, about 1,200 so far since 2020. Different, between one and 5 events every year. We're certainly finding that events in the fall have less people attend them than events in the spring. I suspect it's because fall is football season. People don't want to be bothered with anything on Saturday other than their favorite game, but I don't know. Weather also affects our program turnout. Both of our 2023 events were cold, gray, dreary, rainy days, and we just had a fraction of people that registered actually show up, and I think that has something to do with it too. But another good piece of information we do glean out of there is where people get their information from, and luckily a lot of it comes from cooperative extension and other reputable sources. So that is a good thing to know. And several other states have started bounty programs. I've got a few listed here. I've talked to several others that are not listed. And so, this is something that we are hoping will keep spreading, and we are working hard to make sure that it does. And so regulatory action is next. This thing has been banned in several states. And as Rowena mentioned earlier, I was a part of the team that got it banned in South Carolina. So as of October 1, 2024, Pyrus calleriana can no longer be sold in the state. That includes for rootstocks. I will say that we did not have a big problem getting it passed because we don't have a huge horticulture industry that uses rootstock Pyrus calleriana. Other states like Tennessee, for example, they have a massive horticulture industry, and any banning of Pyrus calleriana is essentially a non-starter. So it really is a state-by-state thing. We also have a fairly straightforward process by which trees get on a do not sell list. There's a very set list of things that goes kind of like a recipe, and it just works its way through. Other states, I am told it is not nearly as clear cut in how you get something on that do not sell list. So as we wrap up here, and I want to save a few minutes at the end for questions, one of the big things we stress is planting native things in the urban landscape, or any managed landscape, really, right? Why do we want to do natives over non-natives? It's good for the wildlife. I think we know that. We know that having trees out there is good for people. And if you plant a native tree, it's almost always going to live longer than one of these non-native ones. And frankly, if you plant a native tree, you're not going to spend nearly as much money on tree cleanup as you would if you plant something like a Bradford pear. That sucker's going to break, and it's going to cost you time. It's going to cost you money. And like I tell a lot of people, for every characteristic of a Bradford, especially, that you like, There's a native that does the same thing, right? Do you like the pretty red foliage in the fall? Well, hey, Shumard oak, black tupelo, pignut hickory, those are beautiful fall colored trees. They're all natives. If you're into the white flowers in the spring, fringe tree, buckeyes are red, Carolina silverbell. There's lots and lots of options for stuff you can plant. Okay, and so with that, I will take questions. I'm guessing there are probably a few, and if we want to talk any more about specific herbicide formulations, I'm happy to do that. So Beth, I will let you take over here.
Well, thank you, David. I think I'll start out. We had a few questions around control methodologies.
Mhm.
And Michael asked about repeated cutting to exhaust the root systems, or cut stump with glyphosate or triclopyr. What is the best answer? Is herbicide the only answer?
Herbicide is never the only answer, but it gets down to how much effort and how much time do you want to put into it. Okay, herbicide is going to be your path of least resistance and fastest results, and I'll just tell you that. Cut stump method with high strength glyphosate or triclopyr is essentially 100% effective. You're not going to have any root sprouts. The tree is going to be gone, and you're done with it. I don't know that anyone's done any repeated cutting, but I think you would have to cut that thing multiple times a year for several years in a row to have any chance at it. Once those things are established, they're just so good at resprouting. It probably can be done. I've not done it, but I would save yourself the time and effort and just spray it, honestly.
Okay.
Yeah.
And along those lines, how do you treat a strong root, one that has produced many suckers along its length? How would you approach something like that?
If what you need to do is get herbicide into that root. So if in some cases, if someone has cut a tree down and maybe then it's root sprouting everywhere, if there's enough stump left where you can just make a fresh cut, okay, and maybe you're only taking an inch off the top, make a fresh cut, then you do your treatment on that cut. By making that fresh cut, you're opening up all those vessels on that tree. And if you put that herbicide on there, it's going to sink in, it's going to go throughout those roots, and it should kill everything. Okay, so the key is just getting it on a fresh cut. And so when you do that stump cut treatment, you need to treat it basically the minute you're done, like within 30 seconds or so of cutting it. So when I'm doing it myself, I've got my squirt bottle of herbicide, and I've got my saw, and it's saw, take it away, rub off the sawdust, and squirt it immediately. Because as soon as you cut that thing, that tree is going to start sealing things up. Just like if you get a cut on your hand, your body's going to try to seal that up, right? The tree does the same thing. But if you can get herbicide into there, it should knock out all the little sprouts too.
Okay. And a question about foliar application. Does a foliar application, they use Roundup, but let's say glyphosate work, or must one use it on the cut stumps? We're dealing with thousands of saplings. So in that case, foliar might make sense.
If you can safely spray it, so where you're not spraying over your head, if you can safely spray it and get good coverage, foliar works just fine. Glyphosate works, triclopyr works. Those are probably your cheapest options. For stuff that's small enough to be sprayed, yes, it works. Again, like with everything, it's all about getting good coverage. Doesn't matter if you're spraying Callery Pear or sweet gum. If you don't get good coverage, it's probably not going to die. But if you get good coverage on there, it tends to work just fine.
Okay. And then the last question on control that we'll touch on, is there a time of year that's better, or can we cut and treat the stump at any point? What's the best timing for control of Callery Pear?
Yeah, great question. Anytime you're doing anything where you're getting chemical into the stem, whether that's a hack and squirt or a cut stump or a basal bark application, you need to make sure it's at least late summer to fall to winter. That's because in the springtime, that tree is pushing all of its stuff up, right? It's flushing out leaves. So if you try to do a hack and squirt or a cut stump in the spring, the tree is just going to push all your chemical up and out, and you're not going to do anything to it. You got to make sure the tree's pulling down, which only happens, once the leaves are full canopy. For Foliar treatment, again, you want to make sure those leaves are mature. So, let it fully leaf out. You can do that a little earlier, probably May, June down here, maybe not, probably Mayish up there, I would guess, but it just makes sure it's got a full canopy on it. So that's the main thing. If you're doing anything on the stem, you want to wait till a little later in the season. Foliar can be done anytime there's good foliage. Now, foliar you don't want to do too late, because remember, by probably August, September, trees are starting to sort of shut their leaves down. Even though they still look green, they're starting the metabolic process of abscission and turning for fall. So I tend to say, if you're going to do foliar, full leaf out to like early August, and then starting there till through dormancy, you can do any of the stem stuff.
Okay. And just for the audience, for guidance on herbicide rates and different types of herbicides, you can go to Blue Ridge Prism's website and go to our fact sheets page. There are resources about Callery Pear, our Callery Pear fact sheet. And then there's also a guidance document from the Department of Forestry that has more information about control methodologies for different invasive trees. So a few more questions,
Sure.
David, before we hit 1 o'clock. Let's see. I had it. There were some questions about the bounty program.
Mhm.
And Ellen asked, who demonstrates that the tree is dead?
Oh, we ask people to bring us a picture.
Okay.
So, like people shoot a deer and take a picture with the deer they've shot, that's the type of thing we're after, is some sort of proof of kill. And there's wiggle room there too. In some cases, it's been really wet and they've had a contract with the tree removal company. We'll accept that. Any type of before after picture works though.
Okay.
Mhm.
And Stephen asked, how does the bounty part of your bounty program work?
Well, that's it. You have to turn in proof that you've killed your Bradford pear, and then we give you a free native replacement. And we do up to 5 per individual, or per property, I should say. Yes, I'm sure some people try to game the system. We've had people that have gone, and just cut down 5 spindly little Callery pears out of the ditch, and that's clearly not what this is intended for. But overall, it's been really successful.
Okay. And do you offer, do you actually give them the live trees, or do you give them certificates to a local nursery that has agreed to carry the?
No, we give them live trees. We give them live trees. And that's part of the fun. We usually have 8 to 10 species. A lot of times there's stuff that you're not going to find everywhere. We've given out pawpaws and swamp tai-tais and magnolias and things that people find pretty, but they just don't, you're not going to see it at Lowe's or Home Depot or a box store, so we try to get good native things for that part of the state. We've got a wide variation coast of the mountains, so species change depending on where we are.
Okay. And let's see, we'll ask one more question. So I think this question was earlier in your presentation. We just didn't get to it, but you talked about the Callery pear taking a while to decompose.
Mhm.
And the question is, it seems that Callery pear leaves take a long time to decompose. Should they be kept out of the compost?
I agree. They seem to take a long time, but I have no idea if they should be kept out of compost. I really don't know. A colleague and good friend of mine at Clemson, Dr. Jess Hartshorn, is doing some work on that, but it's just started. So we won't know for a couple of years yet, but
Okay.
I don't know. And that is one thing we notice, is that they don't decompose well, and they tend to sit under that plant and just kind of hold water. It makes it really tough to burn once they get big too. We talk about burning a whole lot. That's part of the problem, is once those trees get big, is that all those leaves just sort of sit flat on each other and hold that moisture, and the fire almost just stops when it gets to a big Callery pear patch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, David. I think that's going to be all of our questions for today. I just wanted to say, Ann Craddock pointed out that another beautiful fall tree is sourwood. So if you're looking for a nice and native for fall color, sourwood's great. And I also just wanted to remind folks that if you are looking for continuing education credits, please send us an email at info@blueridgeprism.org. I know a few people have dropped requests into the chat and have asked questions about that. but it will just help us and expedite getting something back to you if you could just contact us directly by email, and we can type up a little email or confirm that you were here. So I think at this point, I want to thank David. This was a really wonderful presentation, and I will hand this back over to Rowena to wrap us up for the day.
Thanks so much, Beth. And this was such an informative webinar. A lot of people, I don't know if you had a chance to look in the chat, Dave, that really appreciated all the information you shared. So thanks for spending time with us today. We did get a few questions. You shared some great information, and I think some people want to review it again. So to everyone watching, we will be sending a recording of this presentation to everyone who registered, so you can review it and watch it in your own time. Really quick, can you see the slide in front of you right now? If you have want to learn more about Blue Ridge PRISM, please go to our website. And if you have any more questions for us about this or other invasive issues you might be dealing with, contact us at info@blueridgeprism.org. We have a strong social media presence and would love for you to like us and stay up with us to know, and so you can know what's going on with us and all the information we're sharing. And we are actively looking for volunteers now that the world is opening up again. We have more events that we're going to and need help with tabling, need help with invasive control, need help with helping to do some clerical work or fact checking and photography. So if you're interested in joining our team and working with us and just giving us some of your time, also, please contact us at info@blueridgeprism.org, and we'll get back to you about that. Finally, if you liked what you saw today and want to see more and want to help us continue with our mission, please consider donating to Blue Ridge PRISM. And you can see the link here, www.blueridgeprism.org/donate. Thanks so much for joining us today. And after you click out of this, a survey should pop up. So if you can just take half a minute to fill it out and let us know what we did well and what we could do better, we would really appreciate it. But other than that, I want to thank you again, David. Thanks so much, Beth and Rod, for being with us here today. And we really appreciated everyone's questions and hope you have an enjoyable rest of the day. Thanks so much. It's exactly 1:01. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Hey.